Well, my name is Barbara Birdsbill, and I live here at Wolf Point. Before I lived here, I lived in Fort Kipp. Fort Kipp, there was nothing. It was just a big community. And in that community, everybody was relatives, not real relatives, but we were uncle, grandma. No, everybody was a grandma, everybody was an uncle, or whatever. That's how I grew up. And I grew up I grew up with my grandma. My grandma was up in her 80s, and that's who I grew up in. So I lived in a community where there was a lot of old people. And there when I was growing up, I really learned a lot from them, They're respectful, and, you have to be respectful when you go. I used to go with my grandma. She was in her 80s, and we used to go visit other elderly people. There was a lot of elderly people in Fort Kipp at the time I was growing up. And we didn't have a car, so we used to go visit. We'd walk to different people's houses, my grandma did the visiting and I was there. But every time we go to visit with her friends or her relatives, we were told not to interrupt when people were talking or visiting. Or in the summertime, we'd have to go outside, play outside. But at that time, we had to be very respectful for our elders, We couldn't, when they're talking and visiting, we couldn't interrupt. We had to, in the summertime, we had to stay outside. Go outside now, these are, adults, right? And this was all in Indian, and I can really talk Indian. I know how to talk Indian, because I grew up with grandmas that didn't speak English and didn't know too much English. And that's how I grew up. That's the reason why I know how to talk Indian. I can talk my language. There's a lot of things that I learned from them, about going to different peoples and having respect for people, having respect for elders and things like that. So when we went visiting, they'll say, well, if it was nice, you play outside, because these are adults, and they're visiting, and, they didn't want us to interrupt, or, sometimes, the kids come in there and say, Grandma or Mama, and interrupt their visiting and stuff. Well, that's what's happening now, but in those days, we couldn't do that. We didn't interrupt or anything, because they tell us, well, we're going to visit now, you go play outside with the rest of the kids or whatever, But living with my old grandma and visiting all the old people, I really learned a lot, I learned about respect and, things like that. No interruptions when the adults were visiting, So it was, that's how I grew up. There was a lot in older people in our community in Fort Kipp. Everybody in Fort Kipp was a relative, not, like an uncle. But we were uncle and grandma and grandpa, Now, between the time I grew up to now, it's so much different, These children don't have no respect for their parents. They don't have no respect for other people. In long time ago, it wasn't like that. You taught your kids how to respect and what not to do and all that kind of stuff. But nowadays, it's not like that, We didn't have, there was no drinking, there was no drugs or, things like that. And then every time we went to visit somebody, I was with my grandma, because my mother passed away when I was about 7 or 8, so my grandma raised me. So we used to go visit older people, and that's how I got to know a lot of things, from listening to them and telling us what we're supposed to do and not to do. I really miss that, even now. I try to teach my grandkids things like that, but they don't pay attention because it's different, from their parents. They listen to their parents, and they don't listen to grandma saying, hey, you can't do this and you can't do that, So it's quite different, and it's going to get worse. My grandma used to say that. And she used to tell us all this in Indian, because I understood, Indian, and I still do, that they used to kind of predict the future, in the future, and they used to tell us things are going to happen, and all this kind of stuff. They tell us about our relationship, which is, relatives, cousins, uncles, and things like that kind of relationships. We had to respect everybody. When we went someplace, we had to respect the people that they were visiting. So that's how I grew up. You know what? Nowadays, you don't even visit your brother, you don't visit your uncle, or you don't visit grandma or nothing, Or sometimes you might see grandma someplace, oh, hi grandma, and that's it, You never say, how are you doing, and all this kind of stuff. It's hi, and that's it, But at that time, everybody's a relative, not close relative, but we were all relatives. We are. We're all relatives, no matter what. But those are all gone. Those are in the past now. Now the future, you don't even know who your cousin is, who your uncle is, or, things like that. You don't know that. We don't know that. It's so much different. It's just changing. It's really changed a lot. And it was always respectful. No matter if you weren't a relative, you still say uncle or auntie or, grandma, So that at that time, the people were close together. And you probably could see that now,
Yes.
When you probably have cousins and, cousins, relatives and everything. But if you see somebody, you say hi. You don't say, oh, hi uncle, or hi grandma, how are you? None of that stuff. You just say, oh, yeah, here, hi, and then go right on, You don't even ask how they're doing or nothing like that. It's the relatives, there's no closeness either. No.
Yeah.
So it's so different from the time I grew up to now. So different.